Phil Reynolds, welcome to the DCQ Podcast Special Sits. Great to have you on. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Yeah, a pleasure to join you for this. So hopefully it'll be informative and entertaining. So
We're going to have a go at that. Are you joining us today from London?
yes, I'm in our London office today, despite the joys of the trains getting in this morning. But yes,
Yeah, and it looks like, if I'm looking outside, it's almost dark already, right? Give it a couple of more hours and it's pitch black. So winter has arrived, it seems.
yeah, I do occasionally think that when why did I come back from working in Singapore occasionally when you get to the winter months? So,
We'll get to that because, yeah, you've traveled the world a little bit. But maybe we can start with the beginning. Are you a true Londoner? Did you grow up in London or did you grow up outside?
yeah, so kind of a Londoner born and bred. I'm a Millwall fan for my sins, which people do think going into insolvency is quite suited for someone who's a Millwall fan. So, so effectively, born in South London, moved around a bit, but stayed south of the river.
And, brothers and sisters?
Yeah, so I've got a sister who does something totally different. She's an advocate for elderly and disadvantaged people who don't have family support. So, does something quite different for me in that respect. So, yeah.
So it's because, maybe I wanted to start, how and when and why did you choose a career that, brought you into the special sits space?
Yeah, so I was about to go back. I remember going to my careers officer when I was 16. They made you do a computer job and it came up. So you'll be suited for a job in finance. I was hoping for that multi-millionaire job. I thought maybe I didn't mind the hours, I would have applied for that. So I went to, obviously did A-levels, went on to university, did a business studies degree at Montfort University, which was old Leicester Poly. And it was a business studies degree, and the third year you spent at work. And so you basically apply for various placement jobs. So I applied for one job, which was for IBM, and that was working in their finance team down in Southampton. And then I looked at it, I thought, I'm not quite sure that really excites me too much. So constantly a consternation with the university because I turned down that role. But he said to me, well, you're on your own now. If you can't find a role for that third year, you're going to either have to go straight into the fourth year of the degree or wait a year. So put a bit of pressure on myself. But a job advert came up for what was called the Official Receiver's Office, which is the UK government's insolvency arm. So that deals with kind of liquidations and bankruptcies that, probably the private sector won't take on, as well as kind of special interest liquidations when there's like frauds, things like that. So I said, oh, this job sounds quite interesting, a mix of law and accounts. So I applied for that. Luckily I won it. I was under a little bit of a problem. And that really got me set on kind of restructuring as a career. My first week on the placement year, I had the only female boss at the time there. So it shows how things have changed a little bit.
Progressive from the start.
Yes. So, and the very first week, she had to interview Terry Venables, who was obviously former England manager, Barcelona's manager. And as being the only woman there, they kind of assumed she didn't like football, so they gave her the job of interviewing Terry Venables over one of his failed nightclubs in the West End. So he's coming into the office. Obviously, Brad had in everybody, all the men, lining up to talk to him. He then made a rather clumsy pass at my boss, who just kindly to it. And so
Right.
she gave him an absolutely torrid time in the interview about the reasons for the failure of this nightclub. So he's come out, and I didn't think much of it. And then my mum phoned me up about 4:30 that day and said, son, you're in the Evening Standard paper. Saying like hello and goodbye. So I was on the front page of the Evening Standard, shaking his hand, and on the back page, the sports page, is saying, shaking his hand as well. But the only problem they did is they put the official receiver and his assistant, welcoming Mr. Venables. So you can imagine what my boss was like. You know, the only time she'd have been in the paper and she'd have deemed to be the assistant to a 21-year-old, or not even that 20-year-old chap.
Beautiful, beautiful. So at 20-year-old, you're already, you're
Yeah,
right.
and so spoke to my friends on their courses, and they said, "Oh, what have you done?" They said, "Oh, photocopying, filing." I thought, "Oh, this is a job for me." It did take me another 15 years to get back in the paper, but part of made me think, this is a quite interesting job. High profile, dealing with matters, and so I went back to university for my final year, but because I'd done that year's relevant work experience, I got a graduate role at what was PriceWaterhouse at the time. I still remember that now when my accountancy lecturer went, "Phil, how did you get a job there?" And I was like, "Well, thank you for the vote of confidence in me, but I think it goes back, and it's one of the points that I get in my career now that, you know, for me, it's that point of, when you talk about DEI, for me, it's class, particularly in England. It's very much, you went to an old polytechnic, how on earth did you get a job there? And, I think I've done okay in a career. I worked for 3 of the big 4 and, doing okay for myself where I am. And it makes you think, how much talent as a country do we lose?
By just, having this, this barrier there, this invisible barrier that is there.
Yeah, and I get the point. They've got to draw a line somewhere when you're getting 2,000 applications for each job. But particularly in the field that we work in, the ability to be able to deal with different cross sections of people, be able to be commercial. Some of that arguably is you can train a lot of it, but the other parts, kind of inherent to people's personalities.
And the training ground that you grew up with, South London, that is probably the best training ground.
I still remember, before we go on a little bit, but I still remember the one of the first trading administrations I went on to was a bus company. And I remember going to my boss at the time. I said, "Look, we were desperate to get parts for this bus to be able to finish these buses and sell them." And I said, "Look, this is a key supplier of the company up in Yorkshire. Would you mind if I spoke to him?" And my boss went, "Well, why?" And I said, "Well, no, I think it'd be best if I speak to him." So I've had the call on speaker. The gentleman's answered the phone and said, "Hello, I'm so and so from, was it, from PwC, well, PwC at the time then," and said, "Look, what I talked to you about was we're administrator of this company, and I really need to work out a deal with you to get some stock." And the very first thing he went to me said, "Thank God you haven't got one of those plummy Oxbridge accents, because if that's the case, I'd have told you to f off."
I think, it's interesting because obviously, I'm sort of not a true Londoner. I came here, 25 years ago, still have an accent, but, feel very British myself. But in London, accents are important, and in the UK, accents are important. And sometimes they work for you, and sometimes they work against you.
Oh, yes,
right?
the very next call. But my boss, who was from one of the Oxbridge places, looked at me and just shook his head. But then the very next call, and I think especially in restructuring, it's being able to talk to the whole cross section of the population, particularly when you're trying to reach a deal and an agreement. Any common ground you can build helps. Occasionally I play off being a Millwall fan. If we're in a hard negotiation, I put the Millwall pen on the table. And it's sometimes, they think you're ever going to stop. So very much, So my career, so obviously started at PriceWaterhouse, that then merged into PriceWaterhouse It's always working in insolvency. I found it was a.
And Phil, can I maybe go back to the point where you got your 3rd year? I I guess, work experience at the insolvency service. Did that, was that something you came across yourself, or was it like influenced by your dad or, others? Or this was sort of, you finding this opportunity, actually liking it, and then sort of trailblazing, I guess, a path in a sector that nobody of the family actually has gone into?
Yeah, I mean, in terms, I was the first in my family to go to university, so very much that Thatcher's child, building yourself.
No pressure.
Yeah, so apart from that, I had one cousin who went to a year of printing college, but that was it. That was it. My dad was a printer by trade. Started out when he was 16, and that's all he ever did. Uh, my mum was in finance, so if I look back, I mean, she was doing her accountancy exams whilst looking after two children and being the stereotypical housewife, and thinking, she got partway qualified, but I thought, I was doing these exams with all the benefit of study leave and training and finding them hard.
Yes, you just do it on top of a full-time job.
Yeah. So I mean, let alone, and then I was just me and my girlfriend at the time, not having to deal with a family. So, so there was a little bit of, I suppose, that financial bit there for my mum, I suppose. But it was really finding a way. I mean, a bit like, I picked the university because I liked the nature of the course and the topics. I hadn't really looked at the reputation of the university or anything else. Again, from the school I went to, there really wasn't that kind of training. I looked compared to my son when he left his school, very much to focus on picking the right A levels for the course you want to do at the university you want to do, was embedded in them right from the start. Mine, I put the A levels I was interested in. I then picked the course I was interested in. I hadn't really thought of the wider considerations.
Well, I have the same discussion with my kids, right? Our two boys, and it seems people are so much more clued up these days on the career path and what have you, the why behind what you're doing, and I have to say, at the moment, now having reflected on it for 30 years, I can probably come up with an answer. But if you'd asked me when I was early 20s, I had no clue.
Yeah, so for me, I kind of fell into it. I kind of blamed Terry Venables because obviously he gave me this lovely kind of view of high-profile matters rather than stuff you're doing. But
But then PwC is one of the big four, right? So you're saying it wasn't necessarily straightforward for me to get in there, but I did. And then, were you immediately in business recovery, or did you have to do, some more general stuff first before you actually could specialize?
So I think the advantage is because I came in with a year's relevant work experience from working for the government, and to their credit, they put us through a 2-week residential training course, lots of really good training. So I was up and running straight into restructuring. I've never done a day's audit in my life, so apart from a 2-week training course, I think, which I was basically forced to do just at that time for the experience. But very much straight into that, I did the ACCA exam, so rather than ACA, which then again helped because you didn't have to go into audit to get the minimum experience to do those exams. So I did night classes for the first year of those, which was quite fun. And only when I realised that the only way I could get through tax at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night was to have half a pint of beer in the interval between the sessions.
As you do, as you do. So that started in September 1995, right? You started with PwC. Well, I started in July 1995. So we're almost sort of, and so this year was your milestone as well, right? You've made it 30 years in practice as well.
So quite frightening. When I always thought I was retiring at 35, so I don't know what happened to that. I think children happened to that, I think. But
that changes life dramatically. I know. They're still around the house, right? Now the challenge is to get them out of the house, right?
One at uni, one just started A levels. So got a few more years, I think, for it.
So how big was, restructuring then at PwC when you started? That was already, quite sizable, I think.
Oh yeah, and yeah, I mean it was a really good exposure to lots of different businesses. You know, I went around a few of the different teams there, so did everything from insurance insolvencies through to solvent liquidations, through to trading administrations and advisory work. If I think back, actually, what I love about restructuring is it's always different. At the moment, what I'm dealing with a charity, I'm dealing with a restaurant group, I'm dealing with a manufacturer, lots of different businesses, lots of different sectors, and I think, for my personality, it suits me down to the ground. I could never be an FD just doing the same thing every month. It would just drive me mad, so the variety that it gives you, and
It keeps you on your toes, right? Precedents are there, but, tailor-made solutions is what you need in every situation, don't you?
and also what you're doing means something because you're working at that point of criticality. You know, um, Slightly else, I mean, that's probably why I focused back towards kind of mid-market because the larger stuff used to drive me mad because you knew what the answer was, but you knew it was going to take you 4 years to get there and probably 15 reports. I'm all for the start and that. So I think it's quite funny. I did one of these personality tests, and it was all. I think it's maybe the Belbin model. It kind of marks you on whether you're like an initiator or a completer finisher. And I remember doing it, and the gentleman said he'd never seen such a skewed result to starters. So literally, I was all for the ideas at the start and the finishing really hard. So, and I think actually ties with what I like. What I do is, you reach a solution, you implement, you move it on. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So was from the start at PwC the work sort of regional, national, international, a blend of all?
So I was in London, so I was dealing with the larger jobs. So did everything. I mean, PW at the time had a very big mid-market presence, and out of what was the big four, they'd probably still tried to keep it, even though obviously the cost pressures of being a larger firm in that area. So I had the luck to work with some very good former partners. Tony Lomas was one of mine, obviously from Lehman fame. So some very good people to work for and getting that experience, and you know, honing your skills, at an early age, listening in. It's one of the issues I've got with people working from home, particularly at junior grades, because you learn so much by just hearing what your boss is saying in a call, in the office. And if you're at home, you're insulated. It's so much harder to ask a silly question if you're at home and having an email or call. When you're next to somebody, it's a lot easier. So
Absolutely. I guess we have to sort of adapt, and we'll get to that. I mean, things have changed. So when you started, was it then, more receiverships and liquidations and
yeah,
more like working for the banks, or was it again a mix?
I mean, that's so much. You can really see the change, particularly in the debt landscape over the duration of my career. When I first involved, most of the work was coming from the main clearing banks, and that was the principal source of funding. You dealt with a few private equity investment vehicles, but if I look at that now compared to the plethora of different institutions lending, the growth in private credit, the growth in PE and distressed equity, and the hedge funds, so much more. I still remember one of our marketing ladies came in to us and said, look, we really need to target like the private credit market. And she said, I've done some research and there's like 200 odd firms that we should target. There's only 8 of us in the room. It was like 22 of those, 22, 23 of those each, plus our day job. It's like, that's not, but that level of change in our market, I mean, Lloyds Bank have always been a large client of mine. And if I look back 6, 7 years ago, maybe 40% of my work was coming from them. Now, you know, 5, 10% if I'm lucky,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
reflecting the change in the industry, in their sectors, and so many more people lending money.
Yeah.
Um,
So maybe Phil, so you started at PwC, you were there for a number of years, and then I guess an opportunity came up at another of the big four.
so yeah, so part of it when I look back, when I was at PW, it then merged with Coopers, so obviously from PwC. Unfortunately, the two partners I mainly worked for both left as part of that merger. So, so and I think looking back, it was quite interesting. Both of them have said that they'd put me forward for promotion. Um, I didn't get promoted, and so I thought, well, I've been working really well here. I don't understand this. I then felt relatively isolated with the two partners I'd worked for, both gone.
So the support is gone there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I still remember when so I thought, well, I also really wanted to work abroad. So it was always part of my ambition to work abroad. And there wasn't a readily available opportunity at PW at that time to move abroad, particularly as I'd lost pretty much my two sponsoring partners. So KPMG were looking, and one of the things they promised me within a 12 to 18-month period, I could go and work abroad. So it kind of worked. And I look back at the time, and I remember Tony Lomas coming up to me and saying, well, Phil, look, why are you going? And I said, well, I didn't get promotion. And he said, well, I'm so sorry, but those two partners didn't turn up at the promotion meeting. So
And you can see, right, that makes a huge impact. They may not have realized because they were busy with their own sort of, careers.
yeah, so he said, oh, we'll make you a promotion, we'll give you a promotion. And obviously then being young and full of fire was, well, I was either good enough yesterday or not. So I said, well, that's so I'm going to make the move to KPMG, which is one reason.
Was that a big change? Because obviously, big four, all have a reputation. You actually have seen three of the four big four, because we'll get to that. But Deloitte is also one that comes around. How do they compare? Does it make a difference because you are at a certain stage of your career, or do you actually see a change in, culture, mentality between the big four?
Yeah, so we're say PW, first professional job coming in, really good support network. We worked really hard, but we certainly enjoyed ourselves as well. When I left PriceWaterhouse, obviously I'd qualified as an accountant, which is normally, there's always a decision point at that time. Do you stay where you are? Do you go into industry? Do you look to move? So, it was probably about the right time to think about it. It's quite interesting sliding doors. If I'd have been given a promotion there, I probably would have been quite happy to stay. So, and then held off. So, but I say, going into KPMG, obviously, there were a few people I already knew were quite an incestuous field. So, obviously, I knew some of my counterparts from both my studies, the trade bodies. I was heavily involved in one of the kind of junior networking for one of the major accountancy bodies. So I did have a fair, and I knew the environment I was going into. That one was more on the more formal liquidation side, but part of that again for me, because I knew I wanted to work abroad, getting that bit more formal insolvency experience was quite useful, particularly as I was aiming at other Commonwealth jurisdictions to potentially go and do a secondment in. So, and I was doing at one stage one of the most interesting jobs. I had an investment trust which held 5% of the Chilean stock market in it, and to wind that down, that was quite interesting. With some shares that hadn't been traded for was so illiquid, and we had these positions that we had to dispose of. So I think at one stage I had basically every single Chilean broker working on the assignment. So that was really good to get a good feel of a kind of an international bit. Some of those we did as share buybacks from the companies. We also did effectively helped implement a merger on one to realise value. So that was a really interesting job to give me that, and saying and then in about 18 months of that, the opportunity came up to go to work in Singapore.
And Singapore, I mean, now if we look at our space, it's one of the strongholds in cross-border insolvency, right? I mean, obviously they want to compete with London and with New York. But what was the year when you went there? That was early 2000s, wasn't it?
So anyway, it was all quite funny because I was looking around. So my now wife, she'd worked in Germany for years. So when I did my placement year with official receivers, she went to work in Germany. And so she said to me, look, I know you really want to work abroad. If we go abroad, I want to go somewhere different. And I said, well, I need to go somewhere where I can speak English, because the one thing I'm not is a linguist. So I had conversations, in Australia, New Zealand, and the view, my now wife's view was, well, it's pretty much England with better weather. So, and then I said, well, how about Hong Kong or Singapore? Hong Kong, I think I would have killed myself. I would have worked and partied too hard. I mean, I think I would have, that would have been quite hard going. But Singapore kind of ticked the boxes. It was, what people say, Singapore's like Asia for beginners. So, yeah. Everything works, everything's clean, everything's green. You've got a very well developed legal system, business system. It all works. So I was 28 when I went over. I remember still having my very first kind of video interview with my partner over there, tiny little Chinese man. He looked at me and gone, "Oh, Phil, you're quite big, aren't you?" And I mean, okay, in that kind of blunt Chinese tone. And it was, they'll be very helpful at creditors' meetings when we have angry creditors. And I'm thinking, am I going over as an accountant or am I going over as your bodyguard? Yeah,
as the strong arm. But again, it's funny you say that, because an earlier conversation that I've had with Pete Goddard, who is now at KPMG, and he told us about, his experiences also as a young lad. He was like early 30s, doing work in Thailand, and there was indeed, different dynamics. Also because the way that locally people look at financial distress and insolvency is quite different. They, and if it's family businesses, it becomes very personal. And I mean, so angry creditors, I can see how that, might be an issue. Was that an issue? What was it actually, quite a different
meetings? Everyone turns up. It's quite amazing. In England, barely anyone ever turns up to a creditors meeting. There you'd have a full house, so you can see why. But for me, I think it was the making of me, really. It got me out of my comfort zone. Career-wise, did it set me back a tiny bit, leaving out and coming back? Might delay me by, I wouldn't have changed it for the world. I went over there 28. Next moment, I had a team of 25 to 30 people working for me.
The responsibilities were much bigger all of a sudden when you were there.
A lot bigger. You were a name. There was only myself and one other Caucasian chap working in Singapore at that time in insolvency. So you had, everyone knew you had a cachet. Obviously, all the larger law firms with their expats, they wanted to liaise and deal with other expats. The Australians hated the local guys, so they always wanted to deal with the expats. So walked over there, I had a team that would just do what you wanted to, which is a blessing after working in London. When the first answer is why,
you have to negotiate everything.
Yes, so that really came into perspective in my very first week there. I kind of said to one of the guys that we need to get this report done. Didn't think much of it. Said, have a good weekend. I went home, came back in the morning, saw him, and I jokingly went, "My God, you look like you've slept in the office the entire weekend. Was it a good weekend?" He went, "Well, I have slept in the office the entire weekend because you said you had to get this report done." And I'm thinking that he'd cancelled going to a family wedding. He'd got his girlfriend to bring in food and change of clothing to the office. And he'd literally worked that entire time. I didn't have the heart to tell him I didn't need to report for a couple more weeks. But
So there you see, Phil, communication and expectations. If you're used to, negotiating everything in London and getting, it 2-3 weeks later here, if you're not informed that actually I need it by Monday, I need it by Monday, literally,
yeah, it was that because back in London, if I'd have asked, somebody would have said to me, "When do you need this by?" You know, so. Yeah, but it's obviously because the boss had said to do it, they jumped. But similarly, I remember getting an absolute strip ripped off me by my boss because I spoke up in the meeting. It came out and said to me, you don't speak unless you're approached, And I said, well, but, this is my case I've been working on for you. I had the answer. And then what I worked out after that was there'd always be the number two, the other side. We'll let the two bosses speak. I'd meet the number two afterwards and say, did your boss mean to say that? And they'd go, maybe not. And I say, well, my boss maybe didn't mean to say that. And we'll come to the deal we should have done. Get it worked out. So, I mean, for me, it was amazing that, I was working in, across Southeast Asia, went into Indonesia, Malaysia, made you realise what we call common sense. There's no such thing as common sense. It's, and just in terms of, that, I was going out, drinking, going out the weekends with like the head of tax for KPMG, I was only a manager, going out the heads of Standard Chartered, the 3i guys. So, suddenly a huge senior level of people you were actually friends in and working with.
Yeah. It's like the expat community that sort of, easily socializes, and you're learning a lot along the way.
Yeah. So it was amazing for that. And if my now wife had been happier over there, then I might well have stayed because, I was doing interesting work, had a really good team underneath me, to be honest, I quite like the weather. Despite the size of it, I quite like the weather over there. So occasionally it would catch me out, but, and I still remember when we got back from Singapore and, the bank holiday Monday, we're walking around a B&Q looking at paint. And I went to my wife now saying, well, Gordon, this time last year we were in Bali. What have we done to ourselves? I'm looking at 15 shades of white when I could have been sitting on the beach having a pina colada. So thinking, what have we done to ourselves coming back here? But
sometimes you need to reset things, right? It's sort of, it swings. But I guess, so how long were you there? 2.5 years?
About 2.5 years. I think any longer, there's always a trap as an expat. If you go too long, you become too local or you get used to things. Same for myself, if we'd have stayed any longer, we'd have married, had children, we'd have had a maid or maybe two maids, one for you, one for the kids. Then once you're out there, it's almost impossible to be able to come back. You get used to a certain style of life and the lifestyle, which you can only really do, a place like Singapore, Dubai, where,
or Shanghai, if you go in mainland China. Yep.
Yeah. So I think it's about the right time. If I'd been there any longer, I'd have got probably too local. So I was at the tail end of my time in Singapore. I was working on bearings, famous Nick Leeson matter. So they'd already, we were the liquidators. We'd already sued one set of auditors and won, and we were in the midst of suing Deloitte. And so I was backwards and forwards to the High Court for that case. And at the same time, then I had an interview with Deloitte. And
wow.
I still remember meeting Nick Edwards there, and he's asking, and I said, well, look, well, why are you back? I said, well, I'm in the High Court at the moment. I might be suing you, but let's try and forget that. But, if you give me a job, we might be able to settle easier. So,
there you go. A stepping stone for the next move in his career.
Yeah, so 2.5 years, my partner wanted to come back, so it kind of worked. It's a really good opportunity to come back to, they're winning some really big mandates, and thought, well, here we go. And obviously stayed there for kind of 14 years, so nearly. So
A long time indeed. So you were, immediately in the restructuring team there as well. Back to London.
went back to London, jumped in. I remember it was my very first week was set out onto a new trading administration. I just bought a new house. We was in it for one day. The plumbing hadn't been done properly. We were flooded out. So I was on literally one day in and then out for 4 weeks. I was working to 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, having to drive back to the house, empty the dehumidifiers to get rid of the water, and then carry on to the hotel. So yeah, it was actually a kind of baptism of fire for like, yeah. After Singapore for a while, when pretty much I've been the boss of lots of people, and I hadn't had to really get my hands dirty to that extent. So
The experience in Singapore, did it set you up well to then, I guess, have a more international practice in London? Or did you actually go back to like mid-market because you feel like, you're comfortable in that space?
yeah, so we was doing a whole range of different work, but yeah, coming back into the kind of mid-market team, we come on to, but I've worked on like multi-billion businesses, but I like businesses I can get my hand around and get them where they need to be, rather than where the answer is, but it's going to take you 3 rounds of restructuring to get there. So so come back, really good opportunity doing trading administrations, which I love, and that's one of my skill sets. Nothing better than having to you're out there trying to get a business trading, cutting lots of deals, keeping things moving, and trying to get a business sold. Really, really, that's the biggest drive of our work. Is that level of interaction, going out to business, keeping it going. Really, and it gives you so many war stories. I mean, when I was at Deloitte, I dealt with Blockbuster. So when I had to close that down, but it shows your age, doesn't it? When I say to a kid now, "What's that?" And it's like, "Oh, well, that was what was before Netflix." Okay, and
Yeah, DVDs.
but, I still remember on that one. At that stage, obviously Blockbuster sold a lot of DVDs as well as hired them, and we had an order in for something like 200,000 copies of the latest James Bond. And I was having to talk to Universal to do a deal on them. And I did feel like Blowfield with the evil cat, because they're asking me, I said, well, you've asked me to pay £8 each for those. No, I'm going to give you 4. And the shocks of horror, this is, you can't do that. And I said, well, look, if you want me to sell it, I need a better price than you've given the company. I was like, can't trade. I always felt like sitting here in the leather seat with a white cat, like evil laugh, while I'm making all these executives thinking, well, we need to get the product into that shop. And I've got this guy from nowhere telling me that, dictating the terms to me. Don't you know we're Universal? So
A little bit of leverage goes a long way, doesn't it?
yeah, it works both ways. And that was an interesting job. At one stage, I had a team of 55 Deloitte people for the first week managing that with me. So I was running that. So that really was a quite an interesting role to be at. And that's where the advantage of the big firms are, when you can mobilise, that amount of people at short notice.
And by that time, Phil, was the market already changed from when you started at PwC? There were like new players in the market. The restructurings, were they already there? Obviously we have like pre-packed sales, we have trading administration, but we're sort of getting into the more sophisticated restructurings, right? New players other than the banks that actually have an appetite of doing stuff, and then more tools in the toolbox that have been tested.
So I mean, if you look at that, like if you look at, say, company voluntary arrangements, when they first came in, very, very low take up for the first 5-6 years of them. And then, as a profession, even though we are quite, by nature, we have to be flexible and be responsive. We are still quite conservative with a small c. So new tools take a little while for us to get to use them, because we rely on the standard methods, and it's like, what's the downside risk of trying something new, which we can see now if you look at, say, restructuring plans, for example, look at civil moratoriums, very similar pattern to the CVA take-up. There's a few, then a few more, then there's usually a pause, and then there's a few more after that where people get used to the systems. So, yeah, I mean, if I look when we first came into it was probably the big four had pretty much an open field between them.
Yep.
Obviously, the investment banks were taking the very high-end multinational restructurings, but pretty much everything else down was the purveyor of the big four. When I first started my career, some of the American boutiques kind of dipped their toe into the London market, then went out of it again. But obviously with FTI, Alvarez, all coming in, spending significant money, Kroll really changed the background, particularly with following over the rules of US money that were coming over to invest, and then if that's an issue, they wanted their own firms to deal with it. So,
well, that's right. It's sort of, quote unquote, the Americans coming in, which was also on the legal side, the Americans coming in the market, and all of a sudden, also the funds coming in, usually from the US, and the whole ecosystem changes, right? It becomes a lot more, I guess, professional and more focused on rescue, I think, than on liquidation or just enforcement of security. And I guess, the bigger picture is, I think the UK, together with the US, are sort of known for their rescue culture. But it's very different between the US and the UK, and especially, the role of the big four in the UK. They were at a time dominating, and they had no foot on the ground in the US.
yeah, so it's interesting how that's moved. And say, the change of the funding structures, the options, that a lot more pre-packs now. So it's quite rare now to do trading administrations, which is an all-down interesting impact for us as a business models as firms, because typically the trading administrations were where you earn the money, because that's you could deploy a significant amount of people for a significant period of time. So pre-packs on the whole take away that, because you're not having that trading arm.
Over immediately.
Yeah. So there's that change in our kind of business structure, moving that where, typically advisory work on the whole was a loss leader, because you'd make the money back on the conversion of those into insolvencies. So, with the model now changing where that actually has to stand on its own and make money. And if say, looking at, obviously going back to my point of I always like the law, probably another world I may have become a lawyer. So what I love about insolvency is, I have to know a lot of the law as well as the numbers, and, that attractiveness. But if you look at, particularly driven, by, some of our clients, particularly the hedge funds and that, very much, they know what they want as a solution. They very much see you as a tool rather than as an advisor, and it's balancing that to show them actually, well, you to a US fund, you may not be in Kansas anymore, Dorothy. Things do work, they're a little bit different. That's bringing in that value to help them get to where they need to be.
And do you think that the fact that you were in Singapore for a while also helped you dealing with Americans in London? The fact that they speak the same language, they have, a similar background, but it is different. And we're doing things quite different in the UK and Europe as opposed to the US.
Oh yeah, I mean, you get. I mean, I've had American creditors threaten me with American court action and things like that. It's well, that's all very well, but I don't answer to a US court. There is a balance, and also just making you realise, again, going back to the point that what you call common sense isn't common sense. It's the basis of your history, your experiences, your own learnings. Knowing that people look at things differently, recognising that we all do what we do for nature. We can be very technical without knowing it. we will throw out lots of three-letter acronyms, and it's actually bringing it back to the core, especially in Asia, where with my South London accent, I deliberately would have to talk slower and more clearer and realise keep the language more simple. So rather than using lots of metaphors and everything else and slang, trying to keep to the message and get that across. And that's always been a life lesson for me. It's like being that concise. So whenever I get one of my staff to give me a report, I say, well, look, shrink that down. Can you make that into half a page without losing the message? They come back and then they say, can you make that a quarter of a page? Forcing that, that brevity of thought to get the idea across. Both of what we do for a living, you feel sometimes you're paid by the word. And if you deliver,
which is, I think, especially also with lawyers, they believe that they also need to justify come out because otherwise they're not going to be believed, and the invoice is not going to get paid, right? Because sometimes the best advice is just like the conclusion that you read. There's maybe pages and pages of reasons why you get there. It's probably also expertise and experience combined in a solution. But okay, if it's one page and you need to present a bill, it's like, that can't be right. Well, actually, it is.
Yeah.
You want to have the background too.
That kind of brevity, and I think I always remember I went on a training course by a journalist who kind of taught you that, and one of the stats always took me was the reading age of the Sun newspaper is often higher than that of the Times. So, but actually saying, in terms of, taking it, getting to the point, again, with the change in the mix of our client base, they just want the answer. They don't really care how you've got to it. It's our own pride thinking we have to show them how clever we are and how we got to that answer. Well, actually, they don't want that. They just want the answer. They take...
And in plain English, right?
Yeah.
Just tell it to a 3-year-old as opposed to, very sophisticated technical terms.
You tie it back to their language. I've done a couple of moratorium appointments and had US involvement. And I basically just say to them, look, it's effectively our version of a Chapter 11. Well, it's not really, but it's about as close as we've got. Using that as
and there's a trickiness in that as well, right? Because that may assume certain things that are not there because they're familiar with the Chapter 11.
Yeah, but to get me across
then it doesn't.
Yeah, what I'm doing, it was like, well, just assume it's equivalent to that. It's our only kind of debtor in possession process. So, yeah.
So, Phil, you were 14 years in Deloitte, and then I guess an opportunity came up to go to one of the firms that is, becoming very much a market leader, but probably when you started was nowhere to be seen, and has come up tremendously since. FRP, and
so
they're now already, also for a while.
Yeah, so looking back, I worked mainly for one partner there, and we had such a really good relationship, and we knew how each other worked. We worked really well together. Looking back, I probably should have moved maybe a little bit earlier, but when you're happy, you're doing interesting work. It's you stay. So that was Manning. So but I think he joined Deloitte kind of 6 months before I did. So when I joined, he kind of grabbed me on something, and then we basically just carried on working all together.
So Lee and Neville were sort of, two big names there, right?
Oh yeah, so obviously Neville was our ultimate boss at the time. So so me it was good, and Lee, very similar to me, likes doing the weird things. So we had an FRP partners meeting the other day talking about sector specialties, and basically I got given the weird box. It's like, I thought we'd be very complex and hard to understand or difficult. No, Phil, we just mean weird. So some of the things I end up doing, but
that's I get that all the time. My wife called me weird all the time. That's probably part of the profession.
You feel like you're still weird dealing with a Welsh dairy making cheese. That's and I haven't actually made any, which is probably the weirdest bit about it.
Well, that's right. The day will come that it will be made.
Yeah, so, but yeah, my wife was very disappointed. She said, first time you're doing a job I'd be interested in, you're making like cheddar cheese and they're not making any. So,
Oh, right. Yeah, that's unfortunate, to be really honest.
so yeah, so it's interesting. So the growth of FRP really comes down to probably how the big four tried to compete with the new entrants. So what they tried to do is they thought, we'll go up the debt curve. We want to start nibbling at the work that was going to the investment banks. And then they made a decision to a lot of them to retrench from the mid-market, to say that we can't make that work for us with our cost base.
Yeah.
So that left firms like FRP went, thank you very much. There's a whole field we can go at. And if you don't think you can make money there, we can certainly make money there. And one of my old fellow colleagues, a gentleman called Paul Holden, several years before said, oh, you really need to know Jeff Rowley at FRP. He's a really good guy. And then I'd occasionally have lunches with Jeff. And like me being thick, rather than my colleague going like, Phil, that's probably the firm you really want to go work with. Yeah, right over my head, I just thought, yeah, it's a really good guy to get. So when I finally had a coffee with him, and he said, Phil, like, I've been waiting for you to ask me if there's a role for the last 6 years. I said, I'm a bit slow in the uptake sometimes, but for me, you know, for the mid-market work, you know, I was bumping up against FRP on lots of things, doing and growing the mandate, taking on some really interesting assignments. You know, I came in, I think I was the 42nd partner. You know, and now 8 years' time, we have 110 partners.
Wow. It's growing a lot.
We've gone, you know, even the building I'm in, you know, when I joined, we were just about on 2 floors. We're now 4 of it in London. You know, to be at that level, but the really good thing again is, you know, as soon as you join, you know, it's basically just do what you want, you know, gave me that freedom to just go out, carry what I wanted to do. When I was back at Deloitte, you know, they very much wanted me to specialise. I've done a lot of retail, so they wanted me to be the retail person. And as I said beforehand, I did a job variety. So while, yeah, clearly having sector specialisms is a key part, and it's getting more important.
So at FRP, you're going back actually to the love that you have for mid-market, and you get a role, sort of a free role to do what you want to do. Do you do like more appointments again, or is it very much mixed advisory appointments? You know, working on RP's restructuring plans is obviously something that you've been able to do. You know, as one of the few in the market that has well, you still have you know, 100% success with the RP. So you know, long may that last.
Yeah. So I think the you know, the advantage is an FRP is still keeping a part of that small firm mentality. I remember my first year, I wanted to do a blog post called That'd Be You, Phil, because my binding memory first year is every time I said, well, who can help me do this? Who can help me with that? The answer would be, that'd be you. You know, and obviously after all my career in Big Four, you know, where you've got big teams of researchers, marketing, you know, you know, this big engine you could call upon. You know, the click on my article would have been, but I'm now me at half the price. But you know, the market lady.
Bill, you're not competing on price, right? You're competing on quality and on deliverance of excellence, right?
So yeah, so
don't compete on price. You know, there needs to be, you know, for quality, people need to pay.
That's it. Yeah, that was the thing, but that was kind of the kicker to say, like, you know, this is, you know, I don't have that army around me, but actually I dare deliver the solution to you because that'd be me. So you know,
exactly. Smaller teams, but more sort of hands-on work for senior people. Because I think, look, I've told you that was one of the big reasons for me to, you know, start the boutique, is that the more senior you become in organization, you know, the less actually hands-on you should be, you know, there. You need to feed the machine and the teams. And but if you like what you're doing and you want to roll up your sleeve and still, you know, keep on doing things, you need to be in a different environment to do that. And it looks like FRP is that environment for you.
Yeah, we pride ourselves on that. You know, you will have partner involved, and it's not the partner wins it and then you never see them again. But it's still like interesting when I joined. The first couple of real bits that made me realise that I'm a change in culture my first year having my partner appraisal, and I'm thinking, my God, I've only been 40% charged. I'm building in work, but obviously going from a big four where you've been a director, suddenly your partner. I thought I'm working. It's going really well. Had my meeting. I went, Phil, we had you down for 0% chargeable this year. And I went, you could have told me because it would save me a lot of grief. But,
Keep you on your toes, Phil. Over delivered 40%.
yeah, it was like, and it was like, we wanted you out in the market more. And so, well, if someone had told me that, then I could have judged. That was a bit different.
That is great.
The other bad bit was a few years in, one of my other partners in Birmingham, at the same time as me, came to there. We're thinking, do we look at potentially doing our first overseas acquisition in Cyprus? On the basis that there are a couple of angles there. One was directly from the EU directives, the Bank of Cyprus was having to get rid of 400 million euros of distressed debt.
Lots of NPLs there, non-performing loans that, auctions, you can sort of help these guys.
Yeah, so obviously a lot of this stuff which had just been sat on was going to be having to be worked through. So I said, well, look, both of us said, well, it runs on English jurisdiction. So there's English common law. They rely on English courts. Their act was based on our 1948 Companies Act. So it's all, you can get, it's English. They even drive on the same side of the road. So I said to Jeff, I said, look, why don't we look? My colleague had been recommended a firm to go talk to. And they said, look, we think they've got a really similar culture to you, really good fit. So I said to Jeff, well, what do you think? And he said, well, just book a plane journey and go over there. And I'm thinking, what, no big business plan, investment case? He said, just book a flight, go over and talk to them and come back and tell us if you like them. And it was like, oh my God, that.
Common sense, sort of, a practical approach.
Yeah. So I do get horrendously teased by my colleagues every time I say I'm going to go over there. It's like, so Phil, what's the weather now? And so you're going over again in, was that February time? Yeah. So
when it's very dark and wet over here.
Yes. Yeah. So I do get about a little bit, but for me, that was a real showing that a firm that's still feet of still entrepreneurial. And if there was an opportunity to go for it, we listed. I mean, one of the other reasons I joined, I looked at the firms, and I think actually when you've been at a firm for so long, you sometimes forget what your worth could be to the external market. And I remember at the time, I said to my wife, well, would you fancy going back to Singapore? And so she said, well, look, if you don't find a job in London, I'm happy. We could go over there. She said the prerequisites were that was the international schools for the kids, and I want to go to the Singapore Grand Prix and the Malaysian Grand Prix. If you get me those, then
those are easy to meet, right?
So
it's the schools for the kids.
In my kind of gardening leave, I took some time and I went back to Singapore, but by then I only had like 4 job offers, so I couldn't. But my old 2 bosses there were like, we went out for a night with a bottle of whiskey, and they started trying to do effectively a Dutch auction for me, and it was like, look, I can't anyway. But the number got quite interesting by the end of the evening. I was tempted to say, maybe I should stay here to deal with the flag.
But it looks like you've made the right decision because you've
yeah, I mean, it's
doing the things you want to do.
Yeah, we're using the platform. We get the support. We're doing, because obviously myself and some of our fellow partners all joining from larger firms. We're going up the debt curve. We're doing some interesting. Well, as a firm, doing things like Debenhams and the Body Shop, and some of the, say, restructuring plans I've done, I know full well, our competitors saying, how AFRP doing that type of work.
I guess it is because, you have a background in the Big Four and you now use it in, I guess, a non-Big Four environment. Yeah, I find it very, well, I understand it on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's also a lot of loss of talent. 55-year retirement age that you need to go. It's like, well, okay, there's a new generation that needs to come up. But, at 55, you're actually at the top of your game. You finally sort of have some experience and some expertise. You can deploy it.
Yeah, yeah, it's a balance, but yeah, again, on those, the business model has to work there. They run at a very, what's say Deloitte was one partner for like 10 fee earners. PwC, KPMG is probably 1 to 7 or 8 fee earners. So that pyramid can only work, 10 years on the top of that pyramid, and then you need to let go for someone else. Similarly, why, there's a big loss of staff once they're qualified, because that's the only way the model can work. But yeah, you're right, it brings in that, and it's, have they got the energy still to do that?
Well, maybe that's a question I have for you, because our space is not a 9 to 5 space. It is actually, and you've described it, pretty full on. But there is a life outside of your profession as well, right?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of strands that are quite interesting. So when I was at Deloitte, we had a partners and directors meeting, and we had one of these celebrity doctors come in, and basically said that he'd been doing all the details about longevity. So he'd been looking at the age that partners died for all the different teams, and he said, your tax and pensions people live forever. Then you get partners, then it was like corporate finance, transaction services, and then right at the bottom of that queue was restructuring. And if you think about what we do for a job, every year you start with effectively a blank sheet of paper. It's very lucky to have annuity clients in ours. So, when someone wins a job like Lehman, where that's going to last you all the way through to retirement, they're few and far between.
Absolutely.
On a blank piece of paper, by the nature of what you're doing, you have no idea to plan. My mate is a tax partner. He knows he's going to be effectively busy 2 months of the year, but you can plan your life around that. We know that you can get a call tomorrow.
Everything can change, right? You sort of, pack your bag and go.
Yeah. And at the same time, we're doing the marketing to get out there, to build up those relationships. So you can see why when they looked at that and said your longevity of your partners is quite low, because you're working hard, you've got the stress, and then you're probably eating and drinking more than you probably should do. So you've got that aspect of where we are. The point, what I do like about the younger generation there is a lot more focus on mental health and resilience. If you think about how we used to get beasted by our partners when we were younger,
Yeah. But it was what you saw, and obviously you copied, right? So it sort of, it starts from the top. You're now in a position to actually make a change if you believe that is good. But how did you survive? How did you sort of make it work for you?
Yeah, I found I was quite lucky. My girlfriend worked for Accenture, so she was used to a similar time. I think the first point of pressure got to us when we had 2 children, because when you've got one, you can man mark, and if somebody needs to work, the other one can kind of look after. When you get 2 and they both seem to be ill at different times, it
more difficult. And number 2 is usually sort of handed over then to dad more than mom, because mom is focused with the youngest.
Yeah, so that balance. I look back at the time and thinking, my wife got an opportunity to take a voluntary redundancy and took it, and you can see why in our profession there's lots of divorces and that, because between work and family, how much time you have as a couple kind of shrinks. So in some respects, her taking a step down from that full-on job
was essential.
Yeah, which then actually gave us the bit of flexibility.
And does she understand what it is you do? Because how do you, for example, explain to your kid what it is you do?
Yeah, I think she's got that far. I was home the other day and I was on the call and I lost my train of thought, and she just piped up from downstairs like, you were saying this. So yeah, but it's, in terms of that that I think it helped. Some of my friends who maybe their partners weren't in the same kind of fields have struggled a lot more. In terms of stress, personally for myself, in one of my firms, I had a boss who drove me round the bend to the state when I ended up getting shingles. So shingles is obviously, if you want chicken pox, it always stays in your system and it hides in the bottom of your nerves and dormant. But if your immune system gets damaged or yeah, impacted, like from stress, then the
It's permanent.
the chicken pox virus escapes and comes back. So I had a tiny, tiny little bit of shingles. I thought I'd been bitten by an insect. Went to the doctor, who went, "No, you've got shingles," and then rapidly ran across the room because she was pregnant and hadn't had chicken pox. So that frightened me. She said, "You've got an issue," and run to the other side of the door. But that was a wake up call to me because I'd realised that I'd been taking too much stress. I've been internalising that stress, and obviously, luckily, I had that wake up call rather than the heart attack. So,
Yeah.
um, so that gave me a life lesson in, if things get that bad, stop, change. Don't just carry on. Um, so I try to take that in, and obviously when with my teams there as well, saying, nature what we do, you will be put under stress, and that's sometimes the only way to find out how good you actually are. Yeah, and well, again, you look at the hours. Some of the times. I think when I first joined FRP, one of the younger guys, I went to him and said, "Oh, so what's the latest you've worked?" And he's gone 8 o'clock. And I went, "Oh, I've done a few 8 o'clock in the mornings in my time." And he looked at me like I had 3 heads. And I went, "Oh, you mean 8 o'clock in the evening, don't you?" Yeah.
Wow. Wow. But again, it's you're talking about the younger generation, and I guess the social media that has changed everything. I think our kids were probably the first ones that sort of fully went through the social media cycle. It is difficult now to focus on, well, everybody seems to do so well, because if you look at your social media, it's like, everybody has a brilliant day every day. And in your sort of, what's happening with me? But I don't know, we haven't sort of touched upon it, but one of the things that is a lesson learned in my career is, if things don't go according to plan, you have a setback, you need to divert or adapt to situations. You're not failing. You're actually learning to, survive, and that's what you need to do in life, and you need to do it in your profession. And if you come through that and you can overcome challenges, that's when you get to a position where you are. But there's no shortcut. Everybody has challenges they need to overcome. How do you guys deal with that, in terms of the younger generation? Because I guess we've all had that. We've done the reps. But is that going to be with the next generation the same way or different?
I mean, in some respects, they've got a lot of a more healthier work-life balance. I think our frustrations from our generations is we get that point, but sometimes it's a balance. So sometimes work needs to be here and life down there. And also at a younger level, it's been like junior doctors. If they don't do 80-hour weeks, they can't get the experience needed to do their job when they qualify. And there is a point of that. And I think actually, if you look at AI, a lot of the lawyers I talk to saying, we know AI can take away a lot of these like rote routine jobs, but we need to test our new junior lawyers. Can they be accurate at 4 o'clock in the morning, looking at a sales document? You have to do those hours. You have to do those tasks to be a better lawyer. If you just say AI can do all that for you, what are you going to do when you're working at 4 o'clock? When you have to be accurate, you have to be on your game.
Yeah. I guess, they're questioning, is there ever a situation where you need to do something at 4 o'clock? Yeah, well, there is, especially with, cross-border situations where there's different time zones and you need to get involved. I think with balance, work-life balance is something, the balance, changes all the time, right? Depending on how, mature and old and, experienced you are. And, there's not one set of, balance work in life that works. but you need to be mindful of it, right? And I guess we all need to be mindful of it. We're coming off a very big job. You may need a little bit of downtime.
Yeah.
I think for me, one of the things that was very difficult is because it's feast or famine usually, right? So you come from a feast, you're in the famine, and you cannot actually take the downtime because you're worried where's the next job going to come from, and sort of you're sort of stressing yourself out that it's quiet, but you need to learn to actually embrace it so that you're ready for the next one and have a full battery again. But that's not easy.
Yeah, you're working on your own P&L. You're eating pretty much what you're killing. There is a bit like that. It's like, whenever I get quiet, I joke to my wife, we just go on holiday because I know day 2 of the holiday, someone will come in to ruin my holiday. So, the secret is maybe go on holiday all the time, but then the gods probably wouldn't like you for them. So they wait to.
Yeah.
But when you get, getting a bit older, a bit more mature, you get a bit more reflection. You can, there's something, that you're good, you've got your relationships. Now the work will come, and one of my fellow partners saying that had been really quiet, and now saying I shouldn't have cursed myself. That's the problem. That's the joy of our job. That I can look at my emails after this call and have a referral for something absolutely amazing. You can't.
Yeah, you don't know. So what do you think? If you look over the last 30 years, what is the most difficult part of your job? If you sort of, is it getting the work in? Is it doing the work? Is it managing a team? Is it managing yourself? What is it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of aspects there. One is managing myself because I do. I have spent a little bit of time reflecting that when I'm under stress, I'm different, and it's working through that. I think it was great because they had some like 360 feedback, and it made me feel like I was Jekyll and Hyde. It's like someone says, deal with me on Monday, I'm lovely. Tuesday, I'm horrendous. Obviously, managing teams is always a challenge. I mean, we always say the job would be easy without people, but we've actually got into a people business. At the end of the day, businesses fail. Or struggle, it comes down to people. Very, very few times it's an external shock. It's something to do with the people. And that's what we love about the job is that interaction, with people at a point of criticality where what you're saying makes a difference. Or you're giving advice to people who are under a really stressful point. The worst part of my job is making redundancies. But I still remember the very first one I had to do. I had a female manager, and she said, she basically just dumped these redundancies on me, and said, you can manage. The very first one I had to do was a pregnant lady. She was about 7 months pregnant, and I had to make her redundant. And I think she ended up comforting me. I think I was more upset than her with having to give her the news. And I still remember that my boss said, you have to get the company car back. And I was in that first meeting, she said, well, how am I going to get home? I said, well, look, take the car, bring it back. Get your partner to come back.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
my boss went to me, well, did you get the car back? And I said, no, I was never taking the car away from someone I just made redundant. She'll bring it back on Friday. If you want it, you can go get it because I'm not. But the other thing, when I do that, usually is to achieve the best result and save as many jobs as we can. If I look at just before Christmas last year, I dealt with Deloitte, which was the Marriage Gardens charity. I do actually think I should get an award from the government for this. There should be a CBA award because I think I've saved thousands of marriages. So after Christmas, the January time is the busiest time for counsellors because people have been with their families. It's like, I'm going to divorce or kill them. So, somebody has to give. So January is their busiest time of the year. So,
Wow.
So renting great example, they came to us and said, we're running out of money at the end of the month and we can't pay the wages. And it's like, I think I'm good, but, there's only limited stuff you can do in a space of a few weeks. the whole feeling of what we do as a restructuring profession is all based on that. It's, if the more time we have, the better it is we can achieve a result for you.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, renting, we had to make a third of the redundancies in the space of a couple of days. And so, literally I need to get a runway to see if I can find a rescue here. So we're going to have to make redundancies. So I shaped it to a level which I thought would make it a profitable, attractive business. And I still remember they had the Teams call because obviously everyone's now remote. And I remember one of the ladies said to me, is anyone going to provide some emotional support to us? And I'm looking at this Teams screen thinking, I'm talking to counsellors, like, I'm counsellor.
They need a little bit of counsel. Well, I think I read somewhere, Phil, that you were saying that your job, almost like a corporate marriage guidance.
Yeah, so I've nearly done my pinnacle. I've actually marriage guidance and marriage guidance, someone else. So, but on that, that was probably, we ended up saving that and saved nearly 200 jobs just before Christmas Eve. Literally, everything was done on Christmas Eve. If I hadn't done that, then the thing would have closed. So that's when you look at our job and think, oh, that stress, all of that comes worthwhile, because I'd gotten into a far better business than they were in, far more stable environment, more opportunities for the staff, and that, that's when you think, actually, that's where you do this job for. In fact, we haven't been.
What do you think it is that, in our profession, be it a lawyer, be it, somebody with a financial background, what is the skill set that you need to have? What are characteristics that you need to have to be successful? And what is it that you should not have because it's not going to work?
One thing that probably drummed into me right from the start of is, it's the idea you've got two of these, one of those, use them in that proportion. For our job, listening is key. The issue is once you do this job for a while, you think you know the answer before someone's spoken, and you can rush to a solution. And it's not the right one because you haven't actually listened properly to the situation, the dynamics between the board, where the subtext is. For me, listening, making sure you fully understand what they need before you start speaking. Natural tendency for what we do is, we're the expert, they've asked to talk to the expert, they want to hear from the expert. And a lot of the boards I go into, they know what the solution is. They just need someone to help guide them through it, because it's a very difficult scenario. I think a very small version of that, I did a little bit of pro bono work for a very small charity. They basically looked to do a merger with another charity, and I think their post-merger plan was probably better than I've seen for some FTSE 100 companies. That's what it's been in their time. I think they looked at everything, but the elephant in the room was they needed to make another £150,000 of cost savings, which was equivalent to one of the chief execs. So I've got them in an evening in the little room left them in at the moment. They're in there. I walked in, I see there's a key in the door. So I've taken the key, I've locked the door, I put the key in my shirt pocket, and I said to him, we're not leaving here until we address the elephant in the room. And first time I met her, I was absolutely mad, and I was this madman who just trapped us both in a room. But they sat down and you know none of us. And yes, you've done everything first from your plan, apart from that last question. Your group structure still shows this cloud at the top. And I said, look, if you get that resolved, then you don't need me anymore. I can exit stage left. And I knew for a while that one of them had to go, but we were skirting around a conversation with each other. After about half hour, one of them said, look, there's another role I might be able to get to in another field. And so they agreed that there was a 3-month handover. She transitioned to that new job, and that worked really well. But that was just taking all my experience down to just a very small, there was only like 20 staff between the two organisations, but we've done everything else right to take all the costs out from IT, HR, finance, rationalise their product, the service lines. They just need to get rid of something.
So you've done quite a bit of charities. Is that like a different ball game from, for profit, or is it similar in terms of issues and solutions?
Yeah, so obviously what people forget is most charities are businesses. They're running schools, they're running care, they're running charities that have done with factories, running very complicated things. There are very few charities that are simply endowments that pass that money to other people. Most charities are doing something. Most of them are trading. So the challenge that I find interesting is there's a real disconnect between charity law and insolvency law. So when you're in that kind of twilight zone of uncertainty, they're very uneasy bedfellows. And then you then have that combined manager. You've got your trustees and then the management team, and that interaction between the two. You've got your trustees who didn't sign up to deal with distress. They're germ because they've usually got an emotional commitment to the cause of the charity. Suddenly I get quite often approaches. They've obviously gone to talk to like a non-insolvency lawyer who frightens the life out of the trustees, saying, they'll be personally liable, wrongful trading. A volunteer thinking, well, I don't want to lose my house over something I don't have the goodness of my heart. So a lot of the time I come in and bring in that calmness, saying, well, no, that's not the case here. Talking to me, we can work this through. It's quite rewarding as well. My wife says I do them for karma to make up all the old nasty things I have to do. But it's quite rewarding. Also, you meet some really, really interesting people. When I was back at Deloitte, I was asked to help a large client. I've been careful to say a very large client, and the chair had asked the firm, could someone help his wife with the charity she was dealing with? So it came into restructuring, and I was sent out. I helped the charity that his wife was involved with, helped him through their strategy, got the way through, and then literally about 2 weeks later, I got invited to their house for dinner. And the lead client partner said, I've been working for that client for about 20 years. I've never seen his house. I said, well, you work for the right boss. Explaining, I'm doing it at their house. And they were saying to a very, very senior person with throwing an awful lot of money at our firm. This is a lovely guy, he's really helped us. So, yeah, there's bits in that where, you're dealing with some really interesting people, and
it's a people's business, isn't it? In the end, it really is a people's business, and that's your reputation is built on that as well.
Yeah, so I quite like that, and also quite like the social impact investment side. So rather than people just giving money for charity, you go do good things with it. It's like, well, I want to see a return from that. That return doesn't have to be financial, though it can be. It's, are you putting that money to the best use, to the most effective use? And I think that is really interesting. Now, I'm looking as a cold accountant and saying, well, if that was a 15% risk normally, and you're accepting 8% return, what are you getting for the 7 in the middle? So quite a lot of the charities, some of them, but most of them, they're proper trading businesses. They're doing things.
So in that respect, it's just, it's not for profit, but it's still a business, and all the aspects are the same. So how do you prioritize things when you come into a situation? Because you need to stay calm. There's a lot of things that, should have been brought to you much earlier, but the waiting, denial, and then everything is there. How do you, find out of the million things that need to be done, the one thing or the couple of things that need to be done first?
I think I've been lucky in my career working with some very charismatic people with really good presence, and seeing how people like, my boss Lou Manning, Nick Edwards, how they can, say Novel Khan in particular, how he could go into a room and just get everyone coalescing around him very quickly. But when I did a very large job in Dubai, and a partner came out and he threw the report on the table, massive global credit committee meeting, all the banks, all the advisors. He's put this on the table. So does anyone read this? No, so I just explained to you what we're doing. just that little bit of a bit of humour. I like the humour to get that started. Maybe that's a British thing. Maybe we like to laugh in the face of adversity, but it comes into a little bit trying to break because people are under stress, so they're either going to be aggressive or they're going to be in denial. And it's how do you wear that through?
Or paralysed.
Actually, absolutely paralysed with indecision about what can they do. And I think that almost go back to the very first appointment documents I had to go. So originally, was a junior at PW, literally first 2 weeks or so, can go out to this bank, get them to sign the appointment documents, and then come back so we can then go out and do the receivership. So I'm there, I'm all excited. I go in, the guy said to me, I'm signing this and I'm writing off about £8 million, and probably my job. It kind of brought everything back into perspective for me. The key is really looking at the people there, trying to build that common ground quite quickly. If you can do that, the main value of our job is acting as that honest broker. We'll never say to people that we've got a skill set there, we can hopefully provide some certainty when there's distrust and mistrust on each side. Can we work this way through? So one of the things I always say about forecasts was a lot of my work is looking at forecasts, revising forecasts, trying to get to something which everyone around the table can look at. I say to them, the only thing I can say about this forecast is it's going to be wrong. But my job is to narrow that area of wrongness as much as I can so that we've got something everybody can talk around and make our plans around, and vice can make our contingency plans around if it doesn't work to that level. But I've only had a couple of jobs where I haven't been able to build that rapport. One was a big fraud, and so there was an agenda behind why I wasn't getting the cooperation I needed. And another one where I think it was just my personality personality aspects just couldn't mesh at all. And then on that one, I said, look, I don't think I'm the right advisor for you. And I said, either one of my colleagues or here's another couple of firms to go to. But most of the time, you're there for a reason. People, they brought you in, they want that surety, it's giving them that sense of protection. First thing is, just saying to them, to a bull, I'm your shield of armour in this period of time. I'm the protection that you're doing everything you should be doing this point in time. I usually make them laugh and say, you're balanced about what a reasonably competent bull can do. And the good news is the case for us reasonably competent isn't a very high bar. So, that's it. Get them out of that. And right from the start, one of my very first bosses said, look, don't go in the business telling them what they should be doing. They've been working in this sector industry for 30, 40 years, but you have skill sets that they do not have. Don't preach to them about how to run their business, but you can preach to them how they can maybe run it more efficiently and what their options are. It's...
So should you be, do you think you need to be a little bit of an entrepreneur yourself in order to be, good in this profession? Or is that not necessary? And actually, sometimes that is dangerous if you're too entrepreneurial.
In the mid-market, so in the larger firms, you can have technical partners. You can have partners who've got brains the size of planets. But you don't...
No common sense.
No rapport. But, if you have a particular issue, you've got a structured investment vehicle, you go to the guy who's written the book on them. You might not want to go out for a beer with him, but you will go to him because he'll be the one who will have the solution for you. Mid-market, you have to be a little bit more. It's that social side, building out a rapport and building that rapport quickly, because most of the time you haven't got the luxury of time. Larger businesses, in most of the time, the problem's 2-3 years ahead. You've got most of the businesses I deal with, they're going to run out of money in 3 months at most. So
So do you think that has changed in the last 30 years, that people come to you earlier than they did before? So there's less
I
denial.
think it's almost later because there's so much more finance and different sources of finance. Businesses can go when the bank normally would have said no, and go, yeah, you need to have an independent business review, you need to talk to someone. Now there's secondary, tertiary lenders that will lend as well. So quite often you will find the business customers where basically, they may have 5 or 6 lenders, even a relatively small concern. So they come to you at that stage and it really reduces your options because there's nothing else that you can get finance on. And
it's more complex because you have more players there.
And also, actually, look, their primary source of recovery is the director's personal guarantee. It's not the business. In fact, a lot of them don't even bother looking at the business. They just look at what the director's worth. So when you go from a director, maybe you just had a guarantee with one bank, and most banks would be sensible, and you can usually come to some kind of arrangement. You then with maybe a pleady's been given out to 5 or 6 different institutions, and they're all in a rush to can get the house first.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Hey, looking at the crystal ball, and I know you're sort of, pressed for time, but maybe we can sort of, work towards landing of the plane. You've seen, what has happened the last 30 years, a lot, and we can talk about that much longer. If you're looking sort of going forward, what do you think is coming down the pike?
Well, short term, we're waiting to see what Rachel does in her budget. And I think that is a big concern to me because I think we're getting to that tipping point for consumer and industry sentiment. And if she doesn't handle that budget well, we could finally be in a, as a profession, we've been calling recessions for the last 10 or since the 2008 crash, really. I think if we're not careful, we could end up walking into one. And
it's that bad because again, if you zoom out, I think the whole situation, geopolitic wise, is pretty tricky, right? So in that respect, it also affects us. Sanctions has had a huge effect on us, but also with the tariffs, a lot of the stuff that you and I have not studied for is actually determining what's happened. So it makes it more difficult for us to
but that's there's uncertainty. And that's what saying we can do our job when there's still a ready market of buyers. If you lose the buyers, then we can't do our job. So that uncertainty is a particular fear. A lot of work. This skill set you can work anywhere in the world. Yeah, the law might change, but people do not. So
that's right. Phil, it was a pleasure talking to you. I'm sure we could have talked, a couple of hours longer, but, it was great to put the time in. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.